Greetings and konnichiwa, and welcome back to the Onyx Tavern Vlog series on Russia Sentai ToQger. I'm your host, Rick the Barkeep, and today we're going to talk about the ToQger versus Kyoryuger movie. Yes, because this actually falls within continuity between episodes number 35 and 39, and since we're at the tail end of those episodes anyway, now is as great a time to talk about it as ever. Yes, I am aware this movie did come out after the season ended, but I'm a real stickler for continuity, so I'm going to go ahead and place this movie vlog within the context of the series, and again, not looking ahead or anything, because this movie was obviously written to coincide between these episodes. There are a couple of things to indicate that, and I just want to go ahead and talk about it and not have to wait till the end because, this is a pretty decent movie. I'm not going to say it's one of the best crossovers out there, but I think given the reaction to ToQger and kind of the lackluster interest, they do have a lot of unusual things in this movie because the ToQger are there. Meaning that if they did a crossover with any other team, a lot of these things that they did, they wouldn't do. Much in the same way they did with the Go Buster movie. Because as you will recall, Go Buster versus Kyoryuger was supposed to be a crossover between those two, but it ended up being Kyoryuger, Zoo Ranger, and Aba Ranger the Dinosaur War, with the Go Busters just conveniently in the background. And in a way, they're kind of pushing the ToQger to the background in some parts of the movie, but other parts they are at front and center, and the Kyoryuger don't really matter. So it's really kind of an odd combination here because I think the movie, ultimately what I'm going to say about the movie is it's not focusing on both teams equally, and it's not looking at the ToQger, I think, in a significantly positive light. And what I mean by that, I'll go into that here shortly. But what I want to address first in this film is the continuity, because again, this came after ToQger ended, and I believe Ninja was about to air or had just aired. And there are some unusual continuity problems within this. Because, you know what? I would say Super Sentai is one of the better franchises at getting continuity right and fixing their continuity. Great example is, again, when we had Shinkanger and Goseiger, and then, of course, we had the Gokaiger appear within that film. There was a big issue in there. It's kind of like, well, how are they able to do the Gokai change when they don't have the keys yet? And of course, they went back and retconned and said they were back in time. So they're really good about keeping their continuity. But this movie is really kind of at odds for a few things. I mean, let me go ahead and let you guys know this information. First of all, we know this movie takes place after the Kyoryuger series ended. No problem there. As stated before, this takes place between episodes number 35 and 39 of ToQger, so, no problem there. But also where it gets interesting is that this takes place somewhere after episode 2 of Ninja. So, of course, the Ninja make an appearance in the movie, and I'll talk more about that here later. But it's the continuity is now off, because basically what they're saying is that Ninja happens concurrently with the end of the ToQger. And with the inclusion of the Ninja in the movie, it's just kind of odd that they are there. We kind of get an understanding of where it takes place within their series, but there are some continuity issues there in that, one, that the Ninja are using a technique they've never used before in the series or since, to my knowledge, and that they don't involve themselves in this particular battle. Again, when we talk about continuity and things that should and should not happen, when the Goseiger first appeared, they're supposed to be hidden because they're angels. The Gokaiger are supposed to be hidden because they're back in time. When the Go Buster appeared, it didn't really matter whether they met them or not, and of course, as we know, the Go Buster were going on long before or during the time in which the Gokaiger were doing their mission. The point is, it just seems like a very lazy way of putting them in there, but not really explaining their continuity. And of course, I don't even think there's something you can do within the context of the series to explain, what they're doing there and not becoming involved in the situation. Now, you could say they don't want to get involved because it's not a yokai that they're fighting, but then that just paints the Ninja as being incredibly selfish, saying this is not our problem, so we're not going to get into it. But that's probably reading too much into it. But again, because everything is tight continuity, I just find that to be out of left field. Also, this movie seems to point out that the ToQger versus Kamen Rider, which everybody wanted me to review, did not happen. And why do I say it did not happen? Because from what I can tell, and I've seen some clips of that, the ToQger met Daigo in that episode and used his Zord as a rest shot in it. So they had met before, but this movie plays it like this is the first time they have ever met. So basically, it disregards the events of that episode even happening. So I'm actually kind of glad I didn't review it because, again, I would have to watch all that Kamen Rider to kind of get caught up on it. But now it doesn't matter because, again, continuity wise, it never happened. Because again, there was interaction in that crossover between the ToQger and Daigo, and here they're indicating this is the first time they have met each other. So again, that's kind of weird. And the last continuity issue that I have with this is that the beginning of the movie starts with the Galaxy line returning to Earth, which, as we've established, only returns once every 25 years to Earth. Now, you would think they would put a line of dialogue in there saying that the Galaxy line is returning to Earth for repairs or an emergency stop or something like that. But no, it just seems to be hunky dory, everything normal, and then suddenly, boom, and there it goes. And what's even curious about it is we introduced the Galaxy line, and the concept of the Galaxy line station is integral to the plot. And yet we never involve Lady with the plot, nor does the Galaxy line actually transform into its Megazord form and do anything. Because as far as I can tell, the Galaxy line has only appeared within the movie and has not appeared in the series, and from what I can tell, will not appear later in the series either. So it's kind of odd that you got the actress in there to play Lady, and yet and you have the CG model for the Megazord, yet you don't involve them in the story whatsoever. So again, continuity issue right there that again, this is not within that 25 years because this still takes place within the context of the ToQger series, and yeah, I'm just confused by all that. The continuity and placement of this episode is just kind of odd when you put all those different factors in there. And that's what I'll go ahead and say about that. But let's actually talk about what's going on in the story. Simply put, the day boss have returned. The Kyoryuger are after them, but because the day boss has used the Galaxy Line station, it is now involved with the ToQger. So now you got both factions coming after them. And there are some issues that I have with the boss returning because it does go against a few things. Well, first of all, at the end of Kyoryuger, Daigo did mention that there is a great boss in space, the ones that create chaos and all the others, and that they have to go after him. Now, I had assumed that that line was written in to justify the 100 years after film, because I also assumed that the line of Daigo and Amy getting together was to justify that they would have these grandchildren. And so, of course, that would all tie in. You know, the grandchildren that these two have, this is the moment they get together to fight the enemy that was foreshadowed in the last episode in 100 years after. But that's not the case here at all. The monster that they were referring to in the last episode is the day boss creator, Devis. So that tease that they put at the end of the episode comes in this crossover movie. Which is perfectly fine. But it is specifically stated that, and this is from Daigo, that as long as Davis exists, he will continue to create more Dayboss, that more Dayboss will continue to be born. Now, the movie ends with them destroying Devis, and that's the end of him. And thus, it would seem that the Kyoryuger, or the boss threat is over forever. But that would not explain 100 years after, which to my knowledge is still within continuity, unless there is some sort of time travel aspect of this. And of course, that the movie's not making any claims that there is any type of alteration to the timeline. But again, it's kind of like, so we introduce this villain who is the ultimate villain, and he's destroyed at the end. So where are the dead boss coming from in 100 years after? This is another continuity issue that I'm kind of having trouble wrapping my head around, because you would think they would have him escape at the end or show a little teaser that part of him still survived or something, so that we would have 100 years after. But this kind of negates 100 years after, unless A, this is not the real creator day boss, which I don't think is the case here, or that there are indeed other Debas somewhere out in the universe, and they would have returned 100 years later without their creator. So it's just kind of a little odd that that's thrown in there, that this is the big bad guy that we were teased at the end of Kyoryuger, and this is kind of where he appears, and it just kind of throws things a little bit into chaos. And I will also say that he's not very creative villain. He's not a very interesting villain. And frankly, none of the villains do anything really interesting in this episode, with the exception of the salamander train thing with the crows, which I thought was stupid. I mean, again, given that, there's some comedic elements within ToQger, I just thought that was a little out of left field and didn't make a lot of sense. I appreciate that the Zord battle happened halfway throughout the film, and that they were defeated, because as you'll recall what I said about Ultrazords are supposed to be the ultimate combination, and if they defeat the Ultrazord, then of course, you have the loss of hope, and that the ultimate weapon didn't work. Now what are we going to do? Which does play into this movie, but the monster that they had, fighting him with the salamander, again, train thing, that was just, or it's a catfish, I think. It's a catfish with whiskers. It was really weird to me. I didn't really particularly understand that well. Um, Now here's another thing too. As I said, I think people, and it's probably the American audience primarily, but I do believe it has something to do with the Japanese audience, did not really respond well to ToQger. Again, we've heard all the arguments. The suits are childish, the characters are childless. It's a comedy series. It's not very serious. All those things I, of course, levied against the series itself, and it seems to be that there is a little bit of disrespect for them within the context of the plot, and I think some of that has to do with the real world problems that ToQger had. And what do I mean by that? Well, of course, when the ToQger first start fighting the Deboss, their weapons don't work against them, so they are shown to be physically weaker than the Deboss forces. Second, when all five Kyoryuger come in and basically save the day from them, it's like, once a ranger all over again. They do their pose and the thing explodes behind them, and the ToQger actually get caught in the explosion. I don't like when stuff like that happens. Of course, it happened in RPM. I didn't like it there either. But, they get blown away by the Kyoryuger, literally. And then we have when Daigo says, you guys are not going to fight with us because, one, your weapons have no effect, which we've already established, and two, there's something childish about you guys, something that makes me not want to have you guys fight against them. Something gentle and childish is what he said. So basically, what he is doing is he is dismissing the Kyoryuger because of their ineffectiveness to fight, basically them getting in the way, and again, them being children. And while those points are not invalid in of themselves, this is, again, the 37th Sentai and the 38th Sentai teaming up with each other. Daigo has already met the Go Buster. He has met the Zoo Ranger. He's met the Abba Ranger. He has met the Go Kaiger. He knows of all these previous teams and the legacy of the Sentai. That's something that has happened. And he's commented on these things. And even after meeting all four of those teams, while he is the youngest of all the teams, all of them are the senpai, this opportunity he now has to be the senpai, he really looks down upon the ToQger, and the problem is that the media and people and other fans have been looking down on ToQger as well. Again, I put negative criticism against this series up until this point, so I'm guilty of it myself. But in the context of this film, it seems that real world stuff is getting in here and affecting it the way it shouldn't. Daigo should be in that position where, yeah, we're doing the crossover, we're meeting their Super Sentai team, all the help we can get would be great. But that doesn't enter into his head. It seems, again, that the real world views of the ToQger have seeped into the series and have affected the plot, where it is basically making the ToQger look like the lesser team. And again, this is something that happened with Once a Ranger. We had the veteran Rangers come in, they're cool, they're awesome, they can defeat the enemy, but the Overdrive Rangers are made to look horrible and sucky in every possible way that they can. So again, that's kind of what's happening here. Now, yes, I do understand that the Kyoryuger weapons do not work on the Shadow line, but at this particular time, we do not know that information yet. But given the information up to this point, it just seems that they're not treating the ToQger with respect. Now, as we do get later into the show, the ToQger do have to come to the aid of the Kyoryuger. It is the ToQger to come up with this battle plan against both factions, which I will get into. And, I think Daigo has a new respect for him, whether it comes out of the fact that they save them or that they do see value in them. I'm not entirely sure what it is. I mean, of course, Wright does save Daigo's life in the episode, and of course that could attribute to it. But again, it just seems like it was a false dilemma that was set up there. That, we're going to disrespect the ToQger so we can hold off on the great combining of forces until a little bit later in the show. And, or in the movie. I keep calling it an episode. I don't know why. But that just really kind of irked me that there was this kind of disrespect. And I'm not saying that ToQger is the greatest out there. I just think that I always hate it when the previous team comes in, kind of looks down on the new team when they shouldn't. They are equals, and that's something that we realize within the series is that they are eventually equals, but when it comes to the crossover movies, there is that tendency to kind of look down on them and not look at them with value, or even go against them for some reason. Bulkager versus Geiki Ranger is a good example of fighting them when you really shouldn't. So that's another thing as well. Okay, I do want to go ahead and talk about the weapons and this battle sequence that they have. So the monster that they have at the beginning does this little tick tock kind of thing, where he's able to de-age anybody who actually listens to the song. So unfortunately, Q Gold ends up becoming a baby, and the ToQger end up reverting back to their child forms. And I don't know why this is in the movie exactly. I'm going to speculate a little bit, but here's the thing. They get turned into children, and then there is this dilemma. That they are children now, what are they going to go ahead and do? They confront the Kyoryuger, and the Kyoryuger's like, what the hell is going on? Oh, and by the way, just... Writers, what did you do with Ian? Why did you turn him into a pervert? I mean, you guys know what I'm talking about, right? He literally says to Mio and Kagura that you girls are just a little too young for me. I mean, really? Why? I mean, Ian has never been played up as a pervert, but you made him one. I don't get that. Okay, anyway. So they're together, and it's like, well, you guys can't fight and all that, and of course Wright does a little speech, and I got an idea, and we're gonna go ahead and do this. So here's what's bothersome about this fight sequence now when the two teams actually fight together. First, the ToQger are able to transform, and they do, but now they are in child form. And, okay, let's talk about the history of Sentai and what has happened. First of all, it has been established in previous Sentais that if the character is a child and they morph, they will take on an adult form. This happened in Die Ranger with Cole, Kiba Ranger. He turned into, child to an adult. This happened in O Ranger, where the Gold Ranger, or excuse me, King Ranger, turned from child to adult. This happened in Power Rangers, where Justin turned from child to adult. So why is it in ToQger that this is where the children do not turn into adults to become the ToQger? I don't understand that. Now, what I originally thought was, so we know in a previous episode that Ticket got a hold of the Sixth Ranger Morpher, and when he transformed, he was still a puppet, but he had the costume on. He still had all the powers, but the costume basically fit to form him. And I thought, oh, well, that's probably what they're doing here, is that they're, just forming because they're children. But then I thought, but that doesn't make sense with everything that's been established both in Super Sentai and Power Rangers up to this point. Why is it that this one set of powers will leave children into children, but all the other previous powers will turn children into adults? Now, you could argue that those previous powers were based on magic and whatnot, but ToQger powers are also based on a form of magic as well, or at least some sort of extraterrestrial technology, or over technology is what they call it in the card game. So I don't understand why they're fighting as children. Why is it that this was established? Why is this a plot point that they're turned into children and have to fight in their child forms? Because what's upsetting is, now we get two fights with them where they fight with the Kyoryuger this time as children, and the next, the ToQger fighting only to have the Kyoryuger come in and shore up their numbers and kind of rescue them in that situation. But in this fight, we don't have the juxtaposition of the adult Kyoryuger and, of course, the children ToQger. The ToQger are fighting all by themselves, and the Kyoryuger are fighting all by themselves. They're two separate battles. It's not even like they're in the same room half the time, or excuse me, the same field. So I don't understand why that happened. Not to mention, you have the child actors working off of the adult actors. Now, they are certainly not as terrible as the child actors they got for Samurai, but I just find it as a missed opportunity or unusual opportunity to say, okay, we're going to take our veteran actors against these child actors as opposed to letting our regular actors actually act off against each other, which I think is an unusual thing to go ahead and do. Yes, you get those episodes in movies and TV and stuff like that where the cast is turned into children, but you don't typically have it when there's a crossover. I mean, again, imagine if you did Power to the 10th and the Galaxy Rangers were turned into children and had to act off the Space Rangers. That would be kind of odd and a little dissatisfying that you don't get to see more interaction between your heroes. And really, a lot of the interaction between our Kyoryuger cast and the ToQger cast doesn't occur until the end of the film, and of course, then it's happening during the credits. So again, that's just kind of an unusual thing. I'm also going to say that their solution to fight off the Debos and the Shadow Line is complete BS. Because Wright gets the idea of, okay, so we're going to give you our Resha, and you put them in your weapons, and that will power your weapons. And then you give us your beast batteries, and we'll put them in our weapons, and that will power our weapons. I really think that's complete BS because that is not how this works. It's like the commercial. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. It really doesn't. They just made that up for this particular movie. Because has anybody actually seen the size between what a typical Beast Battery and a typical Resha in both series is? There's no way you can get the Resha to fit within a Kyoryuger weapon, and you cannot get a Beast Battery to fit within a ToQger weapon. The size is just different. And I don't understand why this plot point was brought in there, because you could say that, oh, well, one team working against them is not going to be enough. We need both teams because the numbers are just so great. But no, that's not it. It's like our weapons don't work on them and your weapons don't work on them over there. So we need to fight together. But it's not that the weapons don't work, it's what powers them is what doesn't work. And that I don't get, because how is putting the Beast Battery power source in your ToQger weapon going to change anything? I'm not following this to why that is the case. And why is it that the ToQger weapons do not work on the Daybos and the Kyoryuger weapons do not work on the Shadow Line? Never before in the history of Sentai, or Power Rangers, mind you, have we had this where one team's weapons will not work on another villain. They are ineffective, where, maybe they're stronger and all that and maybe different to what they're fighting, but I've never seen this whole thing where it's like, yeah, you shoot them and they explode with sparks, but then they get back up and keep going. I mean, the closest I can think of is the Super Putties. That's it. But they just need a different type of weapon, but that's something completely different than what we've got going on here. Apparently, your power source is what it is. regardless if you have bladed weapons or not. Which, by the way, I think they disregard this at one point in there, where we do see our six rangers going up against a bunch of the crows and all that, and yet the weapons from Kyoryuger seem to be effective on the crows. Nevertheless, I just think the solution is stupid. They really shift off the better way of doing this, and I don't know why they're doing it. It's not like they're promoting toys here. I mean, a lot of people think that a lot of these things are introduced just to promote toys. I don't necessarily believe that, but I just don't get it. I really have no explanation for why that is here. Um, okay, I do want to talk a little bit about character development and the lack thereof. Now, as stated, I do think this episode is kind of degrading the ToQger in some way, but they actually did give the ToQger probably the best scene in the movie in terms of character development. Um, so when the first battle is done, the Kyoryuger are incapacitated and they're in hospital beds within the terminal, which I will say is probably the worst looking hospital I've ever seen. You don't put six people in a single room together like that. And of course, there are no nurses, no medical equipment. They just put them in a bed and all that. You know, for the terminal, I thought they would have better facilities than that, but whatever. So anyway, the ToQger are on the roof of the station, and they're talking about, basically, the ToQger are talking about the enormity of the situation, because at this point, the Kyoryuger cannot fight, so it's all up to the ToQger, and they have to go ahead and fight. And they've never been up against something like this before. But first, I will comment that's a little bit odd, because they say this time the Earth is at stake. Only before we've had to do one station at a time. But they make it sound like the Earth is not at stake in their series, because I would assume that if the Shadow Line took over every station in Japan, they would spread beyond Japan and take over the whole world, right? I mean, I don't get their logic there that this time the world is at stake, but every time before, oh, the world's never been at stake before, but now it is. So they seem to be crushed by the enormity of the situation, that they don't know what to go ahead and do. They've never faced a threat this big before, and their allies who've been helping them are now incapacitated. They are on their own here, despite still having the Rainbow Line and everybody else to help them. And of course, Lady is out there, but she chooses not to help for whatever reason. But the scene is played very well. They get very concerned about the whole thing, and then they talk about wanting to be children again, because part of them became a little excited that they were children. Because one of the concerns that they've had, and I believe this was addressed earlier in the series, is that when they do find their hometown, and because they're adults, their parents will not recognize them, and it's going to be heartbreaking. There's going to be some issues that they have to deal with. And they bring up, it's like, if we remain children, that'd been great. Our parents would recognize us. But now that we're adults, it's not that I don't want to be an adult. It's just that maybe things would have been easier if we were children. And I kind of like that's what they want. They want to be children again so that their family can recognize them when they do rescue them. But this line of thinking also comes to ultimately what brings them out of this funk, is that they need to take things one step at a time, little by little, and work their way up to saving the world. And I like that, because instead of having that big perspective of everything I do, if I lose, the world comes to an end mentality, they have I need to protect this one station at a time. I need to fight one villain at a time, to where you know what the end goal is, but you need to focus on the little things first. You need to do the little stuff first before you can kind of work your way up. And we have a progression of that, where the train is going to the down station where Devis is, and they gotta take on these little battles before they get there to the ultimate goal, which is, again, saving humanity, saving the Earth. So I know I'm not articulating it as best as I could, but the point of what they're saying is that the situation is larger than we are, but all we can do is our part, and we can do the little things to work our way there. We can't look at it as we have to take all of this on at once. Just, start one station at a time, one bad guy at a time, and work our way towards there. So I really like what they did with the ToQger. That's certainly character development that we needed in the series. Something that really should have happened, I think, much, much earlier within ToQger. But again, they've just been wasting time up until this point. And I guess the real tragedy of it, this is a conversation that happens after the series has finished and not where it should be within the series. So that's a disappointing thing. Now, on the flip side of that, we have absolutely no character development or change with the Kyoryuger. Now, as I established at the end of Kyoryuger, they were all back to where they were at the beginning of the series. Yes, Amy and Daigo fell in love. Yeah, yes, Ian and Soji, they were friends, Ian didn't look down at him. But for the most part, their personalities were the same. They didn't really change. They were the same at the beginning of the series as they were at the end. So we don't really get anything interesting with those characters here. We do get Daigo a lot, but Daigo is still Daigo. There's nothing that's changed about him. His experiences haven't made him a harsher person or softer person or anything. He's just still Daigo. And I think one of the most disappointing things here is we don't elaborate on the relationship with Daigo and Amy. Because, as we said at the end of Kyoryuger, it just came out of left field that Amy loved Daigo and they would eventually have children in 100 years after. And I would think that for something that came out left field and then would only be briefly addressed within the epilogue movie, you would take this opportunity to get those two together, because what happens? They are introduced together. Daigo and Amy both come and save the ToQger at the beginning of the movie, but then Amy goes off and Daigo is left by himself to be with the ToQger. Why wasn't there, maybe some sort of romantic plot going on? Because, hey, what was happening with Bokanger, where the Red and Pink Ranger went out into space and then they came back? They were doing things as a couple. They were doing things together. That was the interesting thing that was happening there. So maybe it could be like, oh, she's my girlfriend, she's my wife, whatever, and we're doing this mission together. And then you have to round up the other Kyoger. Not saying that you had to really, change the plot too much, but do something. The only thing they did in here was they're laying in the beds and Daigo's all upset and just looking at him and the only name he says is Amy and it's close up. But he's not even there by her bed, holding her hand or doing anything. He's not as concerned about her as he should be. I just thought that, again, you throw this notion out there, it's supposed to be a couple. We see the result of that, but we don't actually see them being a couple in this movie, and that's very disappointing. Because I think a romantic subplot would have been great for this film. I think that would have been something to put in there, been interesting. Because we want to see what these characters are doing. And frankly, as I understand it, the actors who played Daigo and Amy were or are still dating in real life. So you could really bring that real world emotion and passion into it somehow. I mean, we never get. I'm going to say this right now. We don't get enough romance in Super Sentai, and I know that's a weird thing to say, but when was the last time two main characters fell in love and kissed? And I'm talking about Power Rangers too. I mean, how often does something like that happen? I don't even think Wes and Jen ever kissed. I think you have to go all the way back to Mighty Morphin when Tommy kissed Kimberly. I think that's like I don't know. It's just a weird thing that there's no emotion, there's no love between characters, and I think this would have been a great time to again pick up that plot thread and maybe do something interesting with it. Let's see some other notes that I have right here. Yeah, I mean, everything else was pretty by the numbers. I liked that the big Zord battle happened in the middle of the movie as opposed to the end. I did have an issue with kind of okay. Let's talk about the villains because there's nothing to talk about. The Shadow Line is still the Shadow Line. We don't really get to know anything about Devis. The one-off monsters are not as particularly interesting, so we didn't do anything interesting with them. And I'm a little torn whether or not it was a good idea to have the Shadow Line come at the end and help the Q region ToQger. I don't think that. Again, I'm on the fence whether that was a good idea or bad idea, but I think in the context of where we are in the series, I don't think it necessarily works. And again, if it was supposed to be about this threat to both the Shadow Line and the Rainbow Line, then we should have focused more on that than focus on what we did focus on. Also, the other Kyoryuger, Gray, Cyan, Silver, and Violet do show up at the end of the movie. but I find those four characters to be interesting characters in of themselves. Daigo's dad, Yayoi, the Blue Ranger's sister, and our manga artist turned into a superhero. I think those characters are very interesting. We didn't get to spend enough time on them. And of course, Canderella is in there with Lucario, and we don't see enough of them. I mean, there's not enough. Kyoryuger had a lot of good support and secondary characters, but we don't really have them doing anything. And again, I like the Kyoryuger cast, but I really wish we'd see some Yayoi in this movie. I wish we would go and see Daigo's father in it. Again, if you didn't want to do the romance with Daigo and Amy, have Daigo and his father working together now to defeat the Debos. I mean, that would have been something great, I think, to go ahead and see that we didn't really go ahead and get. And again, there's just little continuity things and things that don't make a lot of sense. Like, again, what they did with Ian, that just pisses me off. Why does Mikey appear when Mio calls for her? That seems like something Kagura would do, because Kagura, remember, she's like, I'm a strong girl, I'm a strong girl, I'm a strong girl, and then she would be a strong girl. I'm brave, I'm brave, I'm brave, and she'd be brave. That has not happened for a long time, and yet when it happens here, it's given to Mio to summon Mikey, who is a one-off character. So I have no idea where that came from. That makes absolutely no sense to me. Yeah, it's what the heck was that? Um, Okay, well, guys, that's all I really have to go ahead and say about the movie. Again, there's a lot of stuff to go ahead and dissect, but I think this was the stuff that really kind of bothered me, that I really want to go ahead and talk about. And again, not all of it bothered me. Again, the stuff with the ToQger was fine up on the roof, some good character development. And again, it was really nice where we got to see that flashback of them running to the secret base and being all happy as children. You need those slow, quiet moments within a film like this, because then it just becomes all action. And unfortunately, there are far too many films and crossovers within Sentai that is more action than it is character development. But I will say, I do find it upsetting that there was not more interaction between the two teams and their characters and getting to know each other. I think that would have been something great to have. It feels like they only had the Kyoryuger actors for maybe a day or two, maybe three at the most, to actually film with, and Daigo's the only one they could get back for the longest period of time. I could be wrong on that, but it just kind of felt like the Kyoryuger actors were not in this as much as they should be. But again, I enjoyed it. I think it was a decent movie. It wasn't one of the worst. It wasn't one of the best. But I definitely had fun. I just wish they didn't. They trade. I wish I would have treated ToQger with a little more respect. Well, anyway, that's all I have to go ahead and say. I want to know what you guys thought of the movie. Did you guys like the movie? Did you hate the movie? Do you agree or disagree with any of the things that I said? When we return back to ToQger, we'll see what happens post movie and follow up with that. I think we're in episode 39 next. So until then, I want to thank you all for listening. Have a good evening, and the tavern is now closed.